So here's a quick look at some of the things that you'll need to do the brakes. I like to have a nice carpet pad to kneel down on. You might even want to get something with a little more foam in it. Go easy on your knees. And then you'll need your jack to lift the car up, some brake parts cleaner, liquid wrench. An empty spray bottle is good to siphon out some of the excess brake fluid, which you may have if you've added brake fluid since. And a jack stand, a 14mm socket, a 22mm socket, which you might have to go out and buy. It's not in every wrench set that you buy. Then a 13/16 socket to get the lug nuts off, a breaker bar. I use this weight to kind of knock loose the bigger 22mm bolt. As you'll see, they can be pretty stubborn. And then I had an impact wrench just to use. I also use this piece of cardboard to put underneath the car to kind of catch all of the fluids that we'll be using and all that stuff. So, alright, so the first thing that you want to do, this may depend on the jack that you have. I got a Craftsman jack and it's really tall. But I like to drive up onto a phone book, or in this case my textbook from school, and drive up onto it so the car is just about an inch higher so I can get the jack underneath it. With the wheel still on the ground, I'm going to take a 13/16 socket on a breaker bar, and I'm just going to break loose all of the lug nuts. Okay, and then that was my last one. So now that they're broken loose, as you can see, I've driven up onto, or attempted to drive up onto a textbook just to give more clearance because I have a Craftsman jack and it's pretty tall from the side. Anyway, now that I have it in here, I'm going to lift the car up, and I like to just put it on a beam. Now, as you can see, the lift point that I used was a little bit farther back on the car, and the reason I did that is so that I could have the jack farther back and then the jack stand where we're going to support the car more towards the front. So now you can let the jack down a little bit and let it rest on the jack stand, but I'd recommend keeping the jack under here just as a double safety. Yeah, now I have a nifty impact wrench that I like to use on this. I like to break it loose with the breaker bar just so it's a little easier on the actual impact gun. But then get it on here and just very gently take off each lug nut. Okay, now I'm just going to remove the wheel from the car and expose the brake and the disc and the caliper. Now, the way that these brakes work, if you're just doing the pads, you can just take a 14mm socket and loosen up this top one and then take the bottom one off completely. There are these bolts right here with the little boot type thing, and then you can slide it up forward, which you'll see a little later in the video, and that way you can just change out the pads. But in this case, we're going to take and put new rotors on it as well. So to do that, I'm going to take a socket that's actually a little bit bigger, and we're going to take off right here. There's a bigger bolt here, and then there's another one down here. So here's both of them, and by removing these two, we'll be able to remove the entire caliper off of the rotor and then pull the rotor off. Now, before we attempt to take off those bolts that are 22mm, I'm going to use some liquid wrench and soak them because they can be pretty hard to get off. So I'm just going to take it and spray it. I don't know if you'll see this, but just kind of spray it and soak it pretty good on both of those. Okay, so next I've put down some cardboard to kind of catch all the junk that's going to be coming out of here, and also for that liquid wrench that we sprayed on it. And I've attached my 22mm socket with the breaker bar. As you can see, hopefully you can see, I've just attached it to that bigger bolt on the back side. And this can be the tricky part. We're going to have to just, push the bar upwards on this side to break it loose. Remember, it's righty-tighty and lefty-loosey, so when you're looking at it, we want this to turn to the left, which would be counterclockwise. Now this part can be pretty tricky, and you may have to stand in front of the car and reach underneath it like this and pull up on it. The passenger side is a little bit easier. I had to take on the passenger side, take my weight that I use and be pounding the end of the breaker bar with it. But on this side you have to actually pull up on it. It's a little bit harder to do. But just get on it and just pull as hard as you can. As you can see, I got pretty creative here, and I took the part of the jack that I used to lift the car, the handle, and I attached it to the breaker bar. Made a cheater bar out of it, and so now it's just up here on this top bolt. It's a little bit easier when you can push down, but on this side of the car when you have to pull up it can be pretty hard. There, I just was able to break that loose once again with the cheater bar. I just added it onto the torque wrench to give me, or to the breaker bar, give me a little bit of extra oomph on it. Now I placed a bucket down here, and it's not to catch any fluids, but just to set the caliper on when we remove it, because you don't want it just hanging by the cord. Now as you can see in the back, I about have these two bolts out now that I had to break loose, and they're the bigger ones. So now I'm just going to take these out, and they have a washer on them, so you don't want to lose that. And then I'm going to take them both out, and then I'm just going to set the rotor or the caliper just down on the bucket. So then I just remove the second bolt. Remember, they have the washers on them, so we want to keep them together and don't lose any pieces. Now I'm just going to slide the entire caliper off of the rotor. It can be pretty heavy, and it can get kind of stuck if you've worked a rip, like a line into the rotor, if they're old enough. But I'm just going to take it off now and put it on the bucket. So there, sorry about that. That was a little bit shaky getting it off. But all I did was, now that those bolts were loose, I just slid it right off of the rotor. And here's the brake pads in here. And we're just going to take the rotor, make sure that the car's cooled down. This can still be very hot. And this just slides off almost like you're just taking a wheel off of the car. So we're going to just set that aside. And here we are now. You have everything taken apart so far. And the next thing we're going to do is remove the pad here. And we're going to leave the old pad in on one side. And we're going to use a brake compressor tool to expand this caliper, because as it's worn down over time, now it's this size and it's on the rotor, the bigger pads now won't fit inside here, and you won't be able to get them back on the rotor without spreading this back out. And so the first thing we need to do actually is pop the hood and remove the cap off of the brake reservoir. This is where the brake master cylinder is in the reservoir, and we're going to take this cap off to release the pressure. Now, something you might want to know about these G35s is that if the level drops to a certain level, it'll trip the traction control, and all those lights will start to come on. And that's what happened with mine. I have 60,000 miles on it, so the brakes had worn down enough where it was needing more of this fluid to compress the brakes, and so the fluid level dropped. Now, to fix the problem temporarily, I added more fluid to it, and it was fine. And now that I'm doing new brakes, though, when I compress the caliper at the bottom, this fluid level is going to rise back up because we're forcing it back through the lines, and this will most likely overflow. I already did the passenger side, and it came right to the rim here. And so what I did was I took a old spray bottle that had the little squeeze nozzle, and I took it out of the bottle, and I put the back end inside, and I sprayed it into the container, and I'll show you when we come to that point. But just be aware that this level is now going to rise as we compress the brakes.